So let me introduce and ask Tim to conclude the wonderful adventure of thinking about the future of universities. Tim, would you like me to tell you whether 15 minutes have gone by or you're on your own?
Well, you can wave your arm.
At 15?
At 15. But
Very well.
I'm not speaking for more than 20. We must try and get underway for 5.
Good.
Butard, everyone. Nice to see you all. I just want to start by saying, as Gary did, that people like us hugely benefit from meeting people like you from time to time. I hope it's reciprocal, but it certainly is, from our angle, incredibly valuable because you give us energy, you give us perspective, you give us excitement, you make the rest of our lives worth living, and that's something to be cherished. The other thing I was going to say to you is that there's some ideas in here that need dissemination in a world that can't be left to cost, with a capital C-O-S-T. And my thinking, for what it's worth, is that I edit a magazine called Environment. You may or may not know it. It's an American-based magazine published by Taylor and Francis. Its tagline is the promotion of policy for sustainability science. I have been at a number of workshops where I've stood up and said, you guys want to get your act together, I will create an issue for you. And we did this with the Precautionary Principle, which is a very distinguished, important European principle. And it did lead, 1 year later, to 6 articles and a powerful editorial on the role of the Precautionary Principle in a changing world. Because it's actually much more powerful now than it was when it was created in the European Union in the early part of the 1990s. I would like to do the same for this theme. And I've touched with my colleagues here, and there's a possibility this might happen. We would have a theme called Knowledge and Learning and Action for the New Sustainability. Where do universities fit? And I would be very happy to lead on the editing of that. I'm very happy to do that and do all the work. I'm quite happy to do all the work. I spend my time writing people's pieces for them, but it's enjoyable for me. But if you guys are interested, and it's not just the 4 speakers here, it's also for some of the presentations here, particularly our friends from Germany and from the Netherlands. If we had some of that stuff in this magazine. It's a very creative magazine with a large amount of creative artistry. And it's a science policy magazine, and it's widely read online. And its impact factor for those who get absorbed by impact factors is 2.85. I'll say no more, but I just want to leave that with the organisers as a gift, which can be taken or dropped. Gifts are there to be offered, but they don't necessarily have to be received. What am I going to talk about? I actually want to be much more on action than we've heard up until now. Not that the others have not been very focused on that, but there's a time now to take it a bit further forward. And I think we need to talk about why this topic is so important right now. And you've heard a little bit from Angie earlier about Polly Hoffman, this business of the so-called eco-crime. But I'd like to start by saying that the famous document by the Club of Rome, that some of you are associated with, almost 50 years old, called The Predicament of Mankind, led to a document called Limits to Growth. We tend to ignore that document, and I would say so at our peril, because an awful lot of what Randers and Meadows and Forrester was doing in that book and their analyses were actually coming to pass. And my image for you guys is the film by Alfred Hitchcock, which you may know is called The Birds. And the beauty of the Hitchcock film is that right at the beginning, this couple is in a boat and a bird comes down and pecks on the forehead of the guy, who's a famous American actor, but I'm afraid I don't know who it is. At that point, the audience gets a sense of foreboding. And this is the beauty of Hitchcock. You immediately feel slightly anxious. We're getting the beaks of the birds every day. In the Arctic, in the Amazon, in the coral reefs, in the insect population, in the pollinating birds and bees and so on. Every day, these pecks are coming at us. And so the huge challenge we face is within the lifespan of people we're teaching, who are somewhere between the ages of 18 and 25, we may be facing a survival crisis for humanity. And I mean a survival crisis and not just problems. And the developmental ethos and the developmental process operates on a knowledge base which makes it impossible for it to respond to that. It tries to do more of the same, and the more he does more of the same, it creates more trouble. It actually feeds itself into oblivion. So the sustainability movement is actually a movement about what a chap called Jim Bendell calls deep adaptation, transformational adaptation, a whole new agenda. And we haven't got that much time. My estimate, and I've been in this business for 50 years, same time as Paul Gary. I actually was a graduate student in Berkeley, would you believe, when you were just joining. 50 years is what I've been in. We're talking about half of that for the transition, at most. And it's going to have to be led by us working with young people. And the young people are going to be integrally part of this process. They're not just to be taught, they're actually going to teach us. They are our mirrors. When we look at them, we see ourselves in another light. So I'm going to give you about 10 action points that come out of a program like this, which I'll put into this magazine if we get there. Number one, we need to address the university at the level of its own crisis. Universities are increasingly global, they're knowledge brokers, and they're playing the same game. And they're all in some competition trying to get better up a league table, and the higher the league table, the more they can charge fees, and the more they can charge fees, the more they get income, and the higher up the table they go. So they're in a commercial grindstone, which is a treadmill of oblivion when it comes to the knowledge that we need for sustainability transition. And we need to go to the senior people in universities and to the university groupings, in our case it's UK universities, and say, look here, you realise what you're doing. You're creating conditions which make it impossible for the people that you're teaching to survive. In fact, not only that, but you're creating conditions which make these people suffer from being unable to cope with the changes that were being created by what you're teaching them. We need to address the universities right across the world, and certainly in our major nations, so that they fully understand that this is a crisis, and we need to get our NGOs involved with this, and our senior business leaders, and in Britain's case, the scattering MPs have got any brains left in their heads. And I think that can be done. I know the UK university scene, there's an element of interest in that, and there's a fair amount of interest in the business world. And actually, from what I heard today, you need to know there's a lot more positive, good stuff going on than possibly has been said in this room today. But it's not that you don't know about it, we need to address it. So I think we need to get from this INTREPID meeting a kind of portfolio of what might a university look like if this was on offer and why they should do it. The next thing is you need to tickle what causes them to jump. And what causes them to jump is their reputation and what the students think about things and whether they come because the reputation brings them in. The name and the jargon is recruitment. So we go to the students' union bodies. Nationally, I happen to know the head of the Students' Union Sustainability Programme. He's a former student of mine, so it makes life easier. But every university has a student union body, and they're getting more and more keen on getting this type of action going. So we need to address the student unions and get them to reinforce the message, because if they give the message, I can assure you that changes the rules that the universities operate. That's number two. Number three, we need to show business, we need to show civil society The people with the skills that Christoph talked about, that Gary talked about, Paula talked about, many of you have been talking about, are not just employable, but essential. And that's what the universities need to say. You create these courses, you create these ideas, which are primarily student-run, so they come out with a whole series of skills which are far more than learning. They're about leadership. Then you get far further along with the university mind, because that is a very critical quality for universities. I raised the issue in my own University of East Anglia on what's called the student passport. So that's my fourth point. We should be going for the university exit diploma, which contains with it not just a 2-1 in physics or whatever you grade system you use, but a passport of certain skills, which is stamped on your diploma, that you can communicate, that you're flexible. Some of the words that you used, and some of the words Isa used this morning in that excellent presentation, that require you to not to be taught, but to lead and to teach yourselves. That require you to be able to handle in 10 minutes or 2 minutes how to get across to a prime minister or a captain of business how they should listen to what you have to say. Those skills of instantaneous, high-quality communication are learnt, as Gary rightly pointed out, through experience, not learnt by teaching. So we need to give the students in these courses the opportunity to have those experiences, so the passport shows all that's happening. And then the kind of ideas that came from these youngsters this morning become viable. So much my fourth point. My fifth point is we're getting into a world now where we need to look at the framing of the things that Angie talked about just before the tea break, which are in the UN Charter for 2030 that we haven't been talking about. And that's the idea of a civil ecological right for a continued existence. And we should be arguing for that, because that gives the framing for the kind of job markets and learning opportunities for the next generation. If there was a planetary human integrated right, so we extend the UN Charter on Human Rights into a planetary right, then it becomes a crime knowingly to undermine the capacity of the planet to keep us going. And becomes a crime for us knowingly to do that when the science is good enough nowadays to give you the warning. So a beak in the door is a crime. That's not yet the case, but if that was the case, and we should be by we get to 2025, it would transform the learning experience. The sixth point is we need to ensure that people understand the scale with which the tidal wave is coming at us. In the past, we've assumed that sustainability was some kind of nice idea that somewhere down the line would be worth doing. That was Brundtland. The best part of Brundtland was never being talked about, which is the horror of the military establishment. By far the best part of the Brundtland book is the usurpation of brains, of money, of inventiveness into the military system, when that should be channeled into social and economic good. So my argument is another of these framing things which is in the Welsh Act, which you don't know about many of you, but you ought to know, is called the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act 2015. It is a brilliant piece of legislation. It says that every single entity in Wales, doesn't matter whether it's business, government, civil society, education, you name it, has, by requirement, to make sure that they are not undermining the well-being of the next generation. And the next generation is defined as the people living today, below the age of 10. And to do that, they created something which I think is the greatest challenge of all of us right now. I think, although we're talking about the challenge of the planetary system, we're talking about the challenge of the economy, we're talking about the challenge of security, the major challenge is the challenge of governance, and the challenge of democracy, and the challenge of trust in how we're managed and how we run our affairs. As long as that's done by groups and organizations who are corrupt and disingenuous and mischievous we will never have faith in our governance systems, and therefore we can't change anything. And I tell all my students the most important phenomenon is the phenomenon of power. You've got to reorganize power. And the way, bless you, and the way to reorganize power is to start to have a piece of legislation which shows that if something is being done that undermines the capacity of the next generation to be able to cope with what you're bequeathing it, it is unlawful. Now, these things sound to you fanciful, but because the tidal wave is so strong, and because it's so near, and because the next generation are already becoming bouncing about as the water laps around their knees, that is why we need these pieces of legislation. If you want to get your message over, my friends, you need the framing of power, law, regulation, civil society, and a new form of spiritual awareness. And then that technology that Paolo was talking about can be tamed. But if we don't have all these things, that technology Paolo was talking about becomes an enemy within and gives rise to further undermining of our capacity to survive. I'm not going to take all my time, my dear Olivia. I'm going to finish because I want you to have a conversation. We've got a panel. I'm saying to you, if INTREPID wants to leave a mark, you have to go for broke. Don't pussyfoot about. There isn't time for it. You've got the intelligence. You know what to say. Get a grip. And that's my suggestion. And I will leave you with that in mind, and we'll go and have a nice panel discussion, and then we'll have a drink, and I will deliver an environment piece which will have a wide global scope if you want it to happen. God bless you all.
Have really overperformed. All of you, you have been amazing. You've kept us on the ball, and you've given us incredible food for thought. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you also to Tim.